Hello and welcome to the first in our series of podcast conversations on workplace wellbeing, hosted by Know You More. I'm Tim Mart, one of the co-founders of Know You More, and I'll be with you as we look to dive into the very topical subject of, as the title suggests, wellbeing in the workplace. In each episode, I'll be joined by a group of experts and coaches in the area of wellbeing. I'm really excited to introduce them to you in just a second. But first, what I wanted to do is touch on the context and the story on how this series came about. It's certainly something we've wanted to do for a while. Human conversation and coaching, they go hand in hand, and it's right at the heart of what we do at Know You More. So it makes a lot of sense for us to share our world through a podcast. The catalyst, though, for this series is slightly more personal. And it was a day in May, Tuesday the 21st. And we were right in the middle of National Mental Health Awareness Week here in the UK. And after quite a standard morning of breakfasts and school runs, I found myself, or should I say, I caught myself sat staring blankly out of our kitchen window. My head was full of business, of family, of life, and I was feeling overwhelmed and I was tired and I didn't really know what to do with myself. Everything was a little bit fuzzy. Now, this is quite a well-reported phenomenon, I guess, for people growing startups. It somehow goes hand in hand with the label of entrepreneurship. And this wasn't the first time that I've experienced it. No doubt it won't be the last. And as an organization that delivers coaching and coaching at a scale, I'm in a very fortunate position where I'm surrounded by a lot of people that can help me. On this occasion, it was Claire and Mandy, and Mandy's one of the experts in this series, whose conversation helped me get a little bit more control and balance back into my day-to-day. I started on a diet of space, of mindfulness meditation and self-compassion, exercise and reading. But something else came out of that time together in those conversations. And me and Mandy, wanted to channel the experience into something a lot more creative. We wanted to support the wider conversation on well-being and help organizations and us as individuals navigate a business world full of change, full of complexity, and increasingly full of technology. So, and that's the context, and that's what you will learn in joining us on this mini series of podcasts. In this episode, our first, you'll meet and hear more about the people that will be joining us and hosting with me, why they believe the conversation on workplace wellbeing is so important, and what they're really looking forward to exploring over the next 4 episodes. So let's start there. Let's get on with it, and let me introduce you to the people that will be joining us. So introducing then our guest for the podcast series. First of all, and I mentioned her in the introduction, is Mandy Murphy. Hi, Mandy.
Hi.
Mandy's a career transition and resilience coach, supporting young professionals to navigate the complex world. And Mandy's also a nurse specialist in occupational health and wellbeing support, and supporting businesses to develop sustainable health and wellbeing programs. Also on the call is Dale. Hi, Dale.
Hi.
Thanks for coming and joining us on here. Dale is a positive psychology coach, and positive psychology coaching is a style of coaching rooted empirically validated. Empirically validated psychological techniques which draw on the research of the science of well-being. And then also joining us for the series is the wonderful Jane Broche. Hi, Jane.
Hi there.
Jane combines her work as a personal and professional development coach with learning, design and consultancy. Much of her work is supporting leaders to develop resilience and self-care, and collaborating with organizations to design and develop learning initiatives to promote health and well-being. And last but by no means least, hello Rebecca Hitchman.
Hi.
Rebecca is a leadership coach helping to create happy working lives. Utilising her corporate HR and learning background, she works with individuals and organisations. And Rebecca is passionate about the importance of developing a positive workplace culture and the value this has on people's well-being. Thank you for joining us, all of you, and really nice to bring it together on this episode as we start our journey into well-being together. And really for this space, it would be good to get to know a little bit more about you and understand why you believe well-being is so important, why the conversation of well-being in the workplace is so important just now. Mandy, I'm going to come to you first, given the introduction to the series itself and where this kind of came from, and the wonderful support you gave me in the conversations around this. And yeah, if you could kind of kick us off in terms of your thinking around this, that'd be fantastic.
Great, thank you. Wellbeing is just such an interesting area. It's very, very vague. It's misunderstood, and quite often in businesses you hear about, you know, the different initiatives that people run in terms of fitness and well-being and diet, and we're supporting our staff to have access to a gym, we're giving everybody a Fitbit, when actually well-being is way more than that, and it's kind of more about how we create conditions for ourselves to even thrive in, whether it's in work or in life, and be healthy around that. And then the impact that has on us in our long-term kind of life expectancy, but also in terms of our social contribution and how we live and work together in our world. And it's interesting when I kind of talk to businesses around wanting to set up a health and well-being program, or we want our employees to kind of feel better about their work and be more engaged. They focus very much on the doing things. So all these things that we can do to our employees and all these programs we can give them, and instead of creating that sense of being. And it's by creating a sense of being and having that in your culture is how we can have kind of a more sustainable approach to well-being. And certainly from this podcast series, that's really what I'm looking forward to the most, is kind of how we can have conversations to support people to have more sustainable programs and actually create that culture around that well-being narrative.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jane, I know you do some really interesting work in the kind of early year space as well. Is that right? On a similar subject?
Yes, I do. I've been working with a really inspiring group headed up by Linda Baston Pitt, who used to run a nursery in Cambridge. And they've actually implemented a lot of wellbeing initiatives within the early years sector. And what's so exciting about that is it's actually working with children as well. So what they're saying, which makes total sense, of course, is that if we're going to have health and wellbeing initiatives for children, then the staff and the parents and the families and everybody involved with the children need to be modelling the kind of behaviours that we want our very young children to learn. And of course, you know, we're reaching children at that fantastic sort of spot, the sweet spot where they can really learn the behaviours that will set them up in later life for healthier lives. So there's a lot in that whole initiative around sort of preventing obesity and healthy nutrition and so on. But the bigger picture of it all is that in order to have happy children, you need happy staff. And that for me is the message, and that applies whether you're working in early years, whether you're working in education, whether you're working in health or in a big corporate company. It filters all the way down. So when we're working with leaders, it's about how leaders can model the behaviours that they want other people to be showing, but also about how everybody can learn the skills and the behaviours that we know help build well-being. I can hear somebody's dog.
Awesome.
A happy dog.
A happy dog, yeah.
So for me, well-being is like a bit of a sweet spot, I suppose. It's it's that place where you can look at organizational culture, how organizations are really working together to improve things for everybody in the organization. But then it's also with the coaching, you can really work with people's individual skills and behaviors. And I think we all come to this with a bit of a personal agenda as well. So, you know, in my 20s, I experienced burnout. I was involved in setting up an organization that I was very passionate about, and I drove myself into the ground, and I didn't understand at the time what it was. And I just feel like if we can coach people before they reach that point, then, you know, we won't have people going through that sort of experience. And, you know, I'll pass on to other people next, but just before I do also feel quite passionately that well-being is about so much more than the absence of mental illness. It's not just about preventing mental illness. It's about, as Mandy said, it's about thriving and flourishing and really taking us to that sort of optimum place. Yeah, so big subject.
Yeah, it's a huge subject, and the personal thing obviously resonates with me in terms of the start of the business and this whole attachment to an entrepreneurial journey being one that we are working for 14-15 hours, and it's supposed to be that's part of it. If you're an entrepreneur, happy to do that, and feeling that whole sense of overwhelm. Really connect with that recently, and I find the modelling thing fascinating. So over the weekend, my son was playing football, and we were at a football tournament, and I was really observing a sense of, I mean, the word I use is confidence, but there was something there. He didn't have that energy. He didn't have that sense of kind of confidence about it. And so I did what everybody does, like, oh, how do I build up my child's confidence in sport and everything else? And what's the first thing comes up? Modeling, parent modeling. So these are all learned behaviors, and I was like, so these are all kind of learned behaviors, and so that sense of, I think, like you say, even early years in the culture there, and then the sense of modeling as leaders as well is so important, right, when it comes to kind of well-being. So and they're super interested around positive psychology and how that's rooted in well-being, which you kind of opened. Keen to hear a little bit more about that, actually.
Sure. So just kind of, I mean, Jane just touched on it very briefly towards the end of her introduction, which is that well-being and mental health. When people talk about mental health, it's almost a synonym for mental ill health. They don't consider that mental health is a sort of full spectrum of the human condition. And positive psychology specifically, and positive organizational scholarship is specifically focused on the quality of human relations and organizations as kind of the sort of foundational aspect of a healthy workplace. But just going back to the question, which was, why is the discussion on well-being and workplace well-being so important? I would maybe frame it slightly differently and say, well, why is well-being in the workplace important? And for me, there's kind of two clear reasons why that is that I think what we've seen over the last sort of couple of decades is a recognition by workplaces of accepting the human condition, that we spend like most of our waking hours at work. Work is a key driver of engagement and motivation and meaning in people's lives. So it's kind of accepting that people bring their full selves to work, and also that workplaces are not always the cause of mental ill health as well. So it's recognizing, we are human beings. And then there's a second element as well, which is that being in work, that can have an impact on your well-being and mental health. And people are now able to quantify the impact. So the value for organizations and focusing on mental health is, affects the bottom line as well. So I think it's like twofold, is that workplaces are now recognizing that human beings are complex, and also secondly, can we create an environment where we can alleviate mental illness and allow our employees to thrive.
Mm. And there was just on that point, there was an interesting discussion in our community last week on an article that Jeremy shared around something around the dynamics of that, of actually who owns well-being in the workplace, between the organisation and the individual, and those two kind of coming together as well, right?
Yeah, like positive psychology, it takes a sort of multi-dimensional approach to well-being. So one sort of heuristic model looks at sort of the 4 elements of well-being as being mind, body, culture and society. And to look at well-being, you have to address all 4 elements. So you have an individual responsibility to manage your own mental health and well-being, but then you have to situate that within the workplace culture, and then obviously the society at large and what kind of environment we live in. So yeah, I think it's a multi-dimensional approach to positive psychology, which is kind of exciting because you can address it across lots of levels.
Yeah, and interesting point you made there around the organisational perception. That there is, I guess, there's benefits within there in terms of the commercial angle, I guess, of a positive well-being culture within a workforce. And yet Rebecca, with a background in HR, and we're having conversations all the time with HR around this kind of subject matter. That is something that has grown and grown, I guess, over the past sort of 5-10 years. So bringing that background into this as well, and the expectations on that function must be really interesting.
Exactly, because we're spending more time at work, the boundaries between work and the rest of our lives are kind of becoming more blurry. So I think the workplace now has a bigger responsibility in well-being and mental health than it used to. So I think there is an ownership for the organisation to create that nurturing culture where people, where empathy and compassion thrives, and that real human workplace is in existence. But the business case, as Dale mentioned, is really clear for the business because, well people are more productive, they're going to be more creative, innovative, and it's also a great proposition to attract people and talent. So I think there's a really good case for it all round for wellbeing to kind of be at the top of the agenda for businesses. So yeah, I see a real kind of strong role. But I guess what I'm interested in exploring is both of the responsibilities with the person and the organisation, and how they dovetail and work together so that well-being is becomes normality and thrives.
Yeah, and also in the work that you do as a coach. So interested to hear a little bit more about that in terms of well-being, and we often talk about within the Know You More community about that space to stop the doing, and a space to kind of reflective practice and to do more of that kind of thinking. And as you do more of that coaching in that leadership space, are you seeing an impact there in terms of well-being?
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot, one of the big kind of stresses on people is not being able to be their full self at work. So it is about kind of being authentic, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, showing a bit of vulnerability in your leadership style, trying different leadership stuff out and see what happens. So, that creates, as a leader, that kind of models the behaviour as you were talking about, where people can make mistakes, try stuff out and bring their whole selves at work. And I really believe in create that ripple as a leader. You've got, a responsibility for yourself to model it, but also for your team to kind of get the best out of people. Yeah,
fantastic. And it comes back to some of the objections we sometimes get to that about as a leader creating that ripple effect is the courage to lean into that space and sort of potentially show that level of vulnerability, I guess, as well, and that can be a challenge if the overarching culture isn't necessarily a welcoming one for those kind of behaviours, right? So I think that's coming back to something you said, Mandy, about, you mentioned a few times around that word culture, and people then being able to thrive and flourish. And yeah, Jane picked up on those words as well, within that kind of culture. Appreciate that, and lovely to learn more about the breadth and the diversity we have for the people on joining us on these episodes. And you've all kind of touched on it independently, I guess. It'd be great to hear now and really set the scene, I guess, for the next episodes about what, maybe in one sentence or a couple of sentences, what it is that you're really looking forward, having heard everybody's kind of contributions there, to exploring over the next kind of four podcast episodes. And I'm going to start again with you, Mandy. I need to hear your voice again.
Great, thank you. It's so interesting, isn't it? And there's so much that is whirling in my mind just hearing from Jane, Dale and Rebecca. And it is that ripple effect. So quite often it is about, you got to start somewhere as a business or as an employer. And we do spend quite a lot of our living days in work. And that's the environment that we're kind of getting, thriving in or not thriving in. But the ripple effect is a really interesting part, because I use the phrase, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. So you can put on all of the health fair shows that you want and do all the right things as a business. But if your staff don't get involved, then where do you go and what do you do? But actually, those who are most enthusiastic about it, it does create a ripple effect with those beyond, it reaches beyond, if you can create the right culture and environment for that. And I suppose the breadth of experience that we have on this podcast is really good, hearing from the different perspectives about how, whether it's experience of how some of that has worked, or actually some of the things we see in coaching, it's about a mindset shift. It's hard to say that, isn't it? Both from the organization's perspective and how they shift our culture, but also from the individuals. More and more you see resistance. I don't want things done to me anymore. I want to be able to have freedom to choose what I get involved in. I want freedom to go and have a chocolate bar if I want. I don't need you to tell me I can't go and get it. And I should have an apple. And there's that kind of element to it as well. And it makes it quite a confusing place for an employer or a manager. What do we do now if they're sitting eating chocolate on a Friday? Yeah. But I suppose the key for me is kind of how can we explore a little bit more about how business culture, businesses, teams, individuals make that mindset shift and progress on. I do apologize, my window's open and they only just started drilling in the last minute.
Okay.
Apologies if you can hear it, I hope not. So.
Is that drilling in the garden or drilling as a dentist?
Yeah, across the road, I think they're creating a loft. So it's
okay, nice.
I'll put my button on mute now.
No, thank you, brilliant. So yeah, again, that sense of that mindset shift within culture and exploring that. So I'll come back to you, Dale. What is it you're keen to explore as we go through the podcast series together?
Yeah, I'm interested in not necessarily the difference between doing and being, but doing what's doing something and then doing what's actually effective. Because in my experience and referring to like the CIPD's health and wellbeing survey, that it seems like a lot of organisations take an ad hoc approach to wellbeing programs, and it can be short-lived and quite ineffective. So I'm looking to see what the difference is between what would constitute an effective long-term wellbeing strategy. And what that would look like.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm also appreciating your Mean Streets poster in the background. Fantastic.
It's an authentic poster from the 70s. We got it given as a gift, so
that's incredible.
Yeah,
I think if we're talking about the drilling that's going on behind with Mandy there, I think it's important to recognise and acknowledge the quality of the Mean Streets poster. Fantastic. Yeah, great to have you on board, Dale, and yeah, looking forward to exploring that together. Jane, just inviting you back in again to hear your thoughts on what you'd like to explore in the next few episodes together.
Well, it would be great if we can bring some clarity to this, I think, because well-being is one of those words that gets bandied around, and everybody can agree to it, but when it comes to what it actually means, then people get a bit fuzzy, and I think we don't actually need to be fuzzy anymore. We do have some science, we do have some evidence about what works and how we can approach well-being. So there's that, and I'll look to Dale for some of that as well. That would be great to hear some more from him about what's happening in positive psychology. But for me, a personal interest would be how we as coaches can effectively work with organisations and individuals to really get in there. I mean, I think this is the great thing about coaching, is that, you know, we get in right early on with people, and we can spot the signs of any challenge or difficulties that people are having, and we can support them with strategies that can help them to avoid having to have the difficulties further down the line. And more than that, we can actually help them stretch into happier, more fulfilled lives. And that is just such a great thing to be working on, I think. And what I'd also be interested to hear from you, from the Know You More side, about how you're working with organisations so that we can be most effective as coaches.
Yeah.
Because, you know, obviously working as individual coaches, we're not going to be as effective as we can be when we're linked into Know You More, and the way that you can have a more strategic impact when we work with you in an organisational setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of things there, you're probably picking up on something that Mandy spoke about as well, which is around that kind of self-regulation and that choosing to do things. And, you know, we're certainly seeing that as a trend in terms of how coaching is now used and applied as a self-directed option. And also with more of a focus, it does fall into leadership, but into well-being as well. So, you know, with scaling, growing companies where potentially, you know, they spent a lot of time early on in that cultural dynamic and not necessarily having to make the shift of like an existing corporate, you know, they're utilizing coaching in that way as an opportunity to all staff. I saw a wonderful post the other day from a company called Weave in the States, where the CEO gone to the board and said, we're creating coaching opportunities for everyone, you know, specifically for that reason, to, you know, almost to give that space to build those strategies in a very fast-paced, you know, scaling kind of, you know, startup organization. So there's certainly an emergent, a different way of you know, the use of coaching and that kind of powerful conversation happening around us, which is exciting. So really happy to share our stories and hear yours as well in terms of the, you know, the work that you're doing. So yeah, fantastic.
And I think linked to that is also the slight worry that I have, which I think Mandy was pointing to, which is that it could all get a little bit regulated. We do know some of the things that will help, but actually the power of coaching is in coaching the whole person in their very individual personal context.
Yes.
So what I really don't want to lose in all of this is the individuality and the humanity that we have in that one-to-one interaction.
Absolutely. Yeah, that space, right? Yeah. Yeah. And Rebecca, again, you know, I put you last again, but not intentionally. Saving the best to last, Rebecca. Yeah, really keen to hear as well in terms of, you know, for yourself, the conversation we've just had and what's maybe emerged for you that you'd like to explore together in our next sort of few episodes.
Yeah, I think there's loads of kind of meat on the bones with this one. So some of the things that come to my head is kind of the human workplace. So with technology building, how do we kind of keep connection and empathy and compassion in our day-to-day business? Because we know that you know, provide that kind of is a good indicator of well-being, how connected we are, how engaged we are. So I'm kind of interested in that. I think Dale talked about sustainability, you know, how the kind of work that organisations are doing, how is that sustainable, how will it grow, rather than being a kind of a one-hit wonder. And I'm also interested in, we've talked about kind of individuals and we've talked about organisations, and individuals supported by organisations. There's a big growing workforce of people working independently now that don't have the kind of wraparound infrastructure that a big organisation has. And you know, how are we as coaches or other parts of the community helping and get independent workers at work, promoting their well-being.
Yeah.
I think another point is transitions. What are the transitions where well-being could be more of a challenge for people, identifying what they are, and working with organisations, to kind of, as Jane said, get in early and start working with people. So yeah, there's loads of different aspects I'm looking forward to getting stuck into.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a rich conversation, and that whole piece around the future of work, gig economy, people working remotely. I mean, that's always been a challenge for organisations anyway, which is how do you keep people that are working remotely connected to the culture of maybe like a central office, where everything's kind of happening. So yes, as we're kind of dispersed far and wide around the world, and it's great that we have technology to connect us. How are people there supported as well, I guess. And technology, and the impact that that's having on our lives. We had a great session last year around our digital life and how to manage that better. Mandy, remember you set that up, and that was kind of fantastic. But what impact is that having as well in terms of that? I don't know if anyone remembers the kind of film Short Circuit with the robot that was just input, everything coming in all the time. What impact is that happening? So. We're certainly in for a rich conversation together, and I think for the first episode we agreed, and I think and it's come out of this conversation again, which is like, what do we really mean by well-being, and having a session on that together as a kind of foundation, as a kind of sort of building block to them to build on future episodes. So Mandy, Dale, Rebecca, Jane, thank you so much for joining and kicking off this podcast series. Easy for me to say. And I look forward to working with you and look forward to the kind of conversations. So we'll speak to you all very soon.